The morning sun hadn't even come up yet when little Lily opened her eyes. She was lying on a thin mattress in the corner of a tiny room that barely fit two people. Her mother had already left for work. The apartment was so quiet that Lily could hear the pigeons cooing outside the cracked window. She was 8 years old, but sometimes she felt much older. Life had taught her things that most kids her age didn't need to know. Things like which convenience stores threw away food that was still good to eat, which library stayed open longest when it was cold outside, which streets were safe to walk alone and which ones weren't. Lily's clothes were always a bit too small. Her shoes had holes that she covered with duct tape she found in the building's basement. Her hair was long and messy, and she tried her best to comb it with her fingers every morning. She didn't have fancy barrettes or ribbons like the other girls at school. Actually, she didn't go to school much anymore. Her mother worked 2 jobs and couldn't always be there to make sure she got ready in time. But Lily wasn't sitting around feeling sorry for herself. No, she had something that kept her going. Something that made her heart beat faster and her eyes light up even on the hardest days. She had a dream. And that dream lived inside a building 3 blocks away from her apartment. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, right when the street lights started to flicker on, Lily would make her way to the community center. It was an old brick building with paint peeling off the sides and a squeaky front door. Most people walked past it without a second glance. But to Lily, it was the most magical place in the whole world. She never went through the front door, though. That was for the paying students, the ones whose parents could afford the classes. Instead, Lily had found a back entrance near the storage room. The lock had been broken for months and nobody seemed to care enough to fix it. She would slip inside, quiet as a mouse, and make her way to the main hall. The main hall had a stage, and on that stage sat the most beautiful thing Lily had ever seen. A piano. It wasn't brand new or anything fancy, but to her it might as well have been made of gold. Its keys were ivory white and deep black, and when someone played it, the sound filled the entire room like warm honey. Lily would hide behind the heavy velvet curtains at the side of the stage. The dust made her nose itch sometimes, but she never sneezed. She couldn't risk being discovered. From her hiding spot, she could see everything. She could watch Mrs. Chen, the piano teacher, as she worked with her students. Mrs. Chen was an older lady with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore reading glasses that sat on the tip of her nose, and she had the patience of a saint. Week after week, Lily watched her teach children how to play. Some of them were good. Some of them weren't, but Mrs. Chen never got angry. She would simply show them again, her wrinkled fingers dancing across the keys with such grace that it took Lily's breath away. Lily memorized everything. When Mrs. Chen told a student to curve their fingers like they were holding a small ball, Lily's own fingers curved the same way behind the curtain. When Mrs. Chen explained about the C scale and how all the notes followed a pattern, Lily whispered the pattern to herself until she knew it by heart. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. She learned about sharps and flats, about tempo and rhythm, about how to read the strange symbols on sheet music that looked like a secret language at first but slowly started to make sense. Every lesson Mrs. Chen taught, Lily absorbed like a sponge soaking up water. But watching wasn't enough. Lily needed to practice. The problem was she didn't have a piano. She didn't even have money for a toy keyboard from the dollar store. So she did something that might sound strange to most people. She made her own. One evening, she found a large piece of cardboard behind a furniture store. It was from a refrigerator box, flat and sturdy. She dragged it home even though it was almost as big as she was. In her apartment, she spread it out on the floor and got to work. Using a ruler she'd found at the library and a pencil stub that was almost too short to hold, she carefully drew out piano keys. She counted them out just like she'd seen on the real piano, 52 white keys and 36 black keys. Her hand cramped from drawing so many rectangles, but she didn't stop until every single key was perfect. Then came the coloring. She had found some markers in the trash behind the art supply store. Most of them were dried out, but a black one still worked. She carefully colored in the black keys, trying to make them as dark and even as possible. The white keys she left alone, though the cardboard was more gray than white. It didn't matter. To Lily, it was perfect. Every night after her mother came home and fell asleep exhausted on their shared mattress, Lily would pull out her cardboard piano. She would lay it on the floor and position her fingers over the keys. Then in complete silence, she would practice everything she'd learned. Her fingers would press down on the cardboard keys, making no sound at all. But in her head she could hear the music. She could hear every note, every chord, every melody. She would practice scales running up and down the keyboard in her mind. She would practice the simple songs Mrs. Chen had taught her students. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Mary Had a Little Lamb. Ode to Joy. Sometimes she practiced for hours until her fingers were sore and her eyes were heavy with sleep. The cardboard would get worn down where her fingers pressed most often, and she'd have to redraw those keys. But she never complained. This was her escape, her hope, her dream taking shape beneath her small, determined fingers. During the day, Lily would roam the downtown streets. She knew them all by heart now. She knew where the kind shopkeeper would sometimes give her a cookie. She knew where the fountain had the best echo when she sang softly to herself. She knew where to sit and watch people without anyone bothering her. One afternoon, she was sitting on the steps of a big fancy hotel called the Riverside. It was the kind of place where movie stars and rich people stayed. Lily liked to watch the doorman in his neat uniform open doors for guests. She liked to imagine what it would be like to walk through those shiny glass doors and into that beautiful lobby. That's when she saw it. Workers were wheeling something big through the entrance, something covered with a protective cloth. But Lily could see the shape underneath. She knew that shape. It was a piano. Not just any piano, but a grand piano, the kind she'd only seen in pictures. Her heart started beating faster. She jumped up from the steps and pressed her face against the glass door, watching as they positioned the piano in the center of the lobby. It was the most magnificent thing she'd ever seen, black and glossy, reflecting the light from the crystal chandeliers hanging above it. It made the piano at the community center look like a toy. A security guard noticed her and waved her away from the door. But Lily couldn't leave. She walked around the building, her mind racing. She had to see that piano up close. She had to. Something deep inside her was pulling her toward it like a magnet pulling metal. And in that moment, watching that beautiful instrument being prepared for some fancy event, little Lily made a decision that would change everything. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to take a turn that she never could have imagined. Lily couldn't take her eyes off that piano. Even after the security guard shooed her away from the glass doors, she stayed nearby. She found a spot across the street, behind a newspaper stand where she could watch without being noticed. That's what she was good at. Being invisible, blending into the background like she was part of the scenery. The afternoon slowly turned into evening. The sky changed from blue to orange to purple, and that's when things got interesting. Cars started pulling up to the hotel, but not regular cars. These were long, shiny limousines, the kind Lily had only seen in movies. People stepped out wearing clothes that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. The women wore glittering dresses that sparkled under the streetlights. Their jewelry caught the light and threw it back in 1,000 different directions. The men wore suits so crisp and perfect, they looked like they'd never sat down in them before. Lily watched a woman step out of a car wearing a dress that was the color of emeralds. It flowed behind her like water. Another woman had diamonds around her neck that were bigger than Lily's thumb. A man adjusted his bow tie and laughed at something his friend said. They all looked so comfortable, so confident, like they belonged to a different world entirely. A sign near the entrance caught Lily's eye. It read, "Annual Charity Gala Tonight." She didn't know exactly what a gala was, but she understood charity. That meant these rich people were here to give money to help others. The thought was kind of funny to her. All these people dripping in diamonds and gold, coming together to feel good about helping the poor. And here she was, actually poor, standing outside in shoes held together with tape. But Lily wasn't thinking about any of that. Not really. All she could think about was that piano sitting in the lobby. She imagined what it would feel like to touch those keys, real keys, not cardboard, not silent, but actual keys that would make actual sounds. Her fingers twitched at her sides. She'd been practicing on nothing but cardboard for so long. 3 whole years of silent practice. 3 years of imagining the sounds in her head. What would it be like to hear the real thing? To press down and have music come out instead of just the soft crinkle of cardboard? The pull was getting stronger. It was like someone had tied a rope around her heart and was gently tugging her toward that hotel, toward that piano. She tried to talk herself out of it. She told herself it was crazy. She told herself she'd get in trouble. She told herself 100 reasons why she should just turn around and go home. But her feet started moving anyway. She walked around to the side of the building where she'd noticed a service entrance earlier. The kitchen entrance. Staff kept going in and out, carrying trays and boxes and flowers. Everyone was rushing around, busy with preparations. No one was really paying attention to who was coming and going. Lily took a deep breath. Then another. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was different from sneaking into the community center. This was a fancy hotel. With security guards, with cameras, with important people. What was she thinking? But then she pictured that piano again. That beautiful, perfect piano. And before she could change her mind, she slipped through the door behind a waiter carrying a tall stack of plates. The kitchen was chaos. People were shouting orders in different languages. Pots were clanging. Something was sizzling on a dozen different stoves. The smell of fancy food filled the air, things Lily couldn't even name. Roasted something. Butter and herbs. Fresh bread. Her stomach growled, but she kept moving. She was small. That was her advantage. She could duck under arms and weave between people. A chef almost bumped into her but just muttered something and kept going. A waitress nearly stepped on her foot, but nobody really looked at her. They were all too focused on their own tasks, and then she was through. She'd made it past the kitchen and into a hallway. The carpet here was thick and soft under her worn shoes. The walls were covered in fancy wallpaper with gold designs. Even the hallway was more beautiful than any room Lily had ever been in. She followed the sound of music and voices. Classical music was playing softly through speakers somewhere. She could hear the tinkling of glasses and the murmur of conversation. She turned a corner and found herself at the edge of the main lobby. It was even more incredible than she'd imagined. The ceiling was so high it made her dizzy to look up at it. Crystal chandeliers hung down like frozen waterfalls made of light. The floor was polished marble that reflected everything like a mirror, and in the center of it all, raised up on a small platform, was the piano. Lily just stood there, frozen. She'd never seen anything so magnificent in her entire life. The piano's black surface was so shiny she could see the chandelier reflected in it. It looked like something from a fairy tale, something that shouldn't exist in the real world. People were gathered around in small groups, holding champagne glasses and talking. Their voices echoed in the big space. Lily tried to make herself even smaller, shrinking back against the wall. But it was too late. A boy about her age noticed her first. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than her mother made in a month. His hair was combed perfectly. His shoes were so shiny they caught the light. He pointed right at her, and his voice rang out loud and clear. "Look, a street kid got in." Several heads turned. The boy's voice had cut through the polite conversation like a knife. Lily felt her face get hot. Her first instinct was to run, to turn around and bolt back through that kitchen and out into the safety of the dark streets where she belonged. But something held her in place. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was all those years of practicing in silence. Maybe it was just that she'd come this far and wasn't ready to give up yet. The boy's mother, a woman in a pearl necklace and a dress that was probably worth a car, quickly pulled him back. "Hush," she whispered, but her eyes were on Lily too. They weren't mean exactly, but they weren't kind either. They were the eyes of someone looking at something that didn't belong. More people turned to look. Lily heard whispers starting up. A girl in a velvet dress wrinkled her nose like she smelled something bad. An older man adjusted his glasses to get a better look. A woman with red lipstick whispered something to her friend behind her hand. Lily could feel the weight of all those eyes on her. She knew what they were seeing. A small girl with messy hair and clothes that didn't fit right, shoes with tape on them, dirt under her fingernails from the streets. She knew she looked out of place. She knew she didn't belong in this world of crystal and champagne and fancy dresses. The hotel manager, a tall man in a perfect black suit, started walking toward her. His face was serious but not cruel. He was just doing his job, and his job was to keep street kids out of fancy galas. But before he could reach her, before he could take her arm and escort her back out into the night, Lily did something that surprised everyone in that lobby, including herself. She walked straight toward the piano, not away from it, toward it. Her legs felt like they might give out any second. Her hands were shaking, but she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, across that marble floor, past the groups of rich people who parted like water as she approached. She could hear the whispers getting louder, confused voices, concerned voices, some amused voices too. What was this little girl doing? Where did she come from? Who let her in? Someone should stop her. But Lily kept walking until she stood right in front of that beautiful piano, right there in the center of everyone's attention, in the center of all that judgment and confusion and surprise. Her voice came out small at first, so quiet that only the people closest to her could hear. "I can play." The whispers stopped for just a second. Then they started up again, louder this time. Some people laughed. Not mean laughs exactly, but the kind of laughs people make when they think a child has said something silly, something impossibly cute in its innocence. The boy who'd first pointed her out burst out laughing, really laughing now, like this was the funniest thing he'd heard all year. "You?" he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Play this piano? That's a joke." Other people were smiling now too. Uncomfortable smiles. Awkward smiles. A woman in pearls leaned toward her companion, and Lily heard her whisper clearly. "Poor thing is probably confused. Someone should get her out before she damages it." The hotel manager was almost to her now. His hand was reaching out to take her shoulder, to gently but firmly guide her away from the expensive instrument, away from this place where she clearly didn't belong. But then something unexpected happened. A voice rang out across the lobby, a voice that carried authority without having to shout. "Wait." Everyone turned to see who had spoken. The crowd parted like curtains opening on a stage. An elderly woman stepped forward, and Lily could tell right away that she was someone important. Really important. She was wearing a dress the color of deep purple wine. It was elegant without being flashy. Her white hair was styled perfectly, and she wore a simple strand of pearls that somehow looked more expensive than all the flashy jewelry in the room combined. But it was her eyes that caught Lily's attention. They were sharp and clear, and they looked at Lily not with pity or amusement, but with something else. Something like recognition. The hotel manager stopped in his tracks. His hand, which had been reaching for Lily's shoulder, dropped to his side. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, and Lily could hear the respect in his voice, even a little bit of fear. So this was Mrs. Ashworth. Lily had seen her name in the newspaper once, and a copy she'd found in the trash. Something about her donating money to build a new wing at the children's hospital. She was one of those people who was rich and powerful, the kind of person who could change things with just a phone call. Mrs. Ashworth walked closer, her shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. She didn't rush. She moved like someone who knew that people would wait for her, no matter how long she took. When she reached Lily, she looked down at her with those piercing eyes. "Let the child speak," Mrs. Ashworth said. Her voice wasn't loud, but somehow everyone in the lobby heard it perfectly. Lily felt her throat go dry. All these people were staring at her, waiting. The boy who'd laughed at her was quiet now, standing next to his mother with his mouth slightly open. The woman in pearls had stopped whispering. Even the waiters who'd been moving around with trays of champagne had paused to watch. Lily swallowed hard. Her voice came out shaky at first, but she forced herself to keep talking. "I've been learning," she said. "I know I don't look like I belong here. I know my clothes are old and my shoes have tape on them. But I can play. I really can." Some people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A man in the back coughed. The boy's mother put her hand on his shoulder and squeezed like she was suddenly embarrassed about his earlier laughter. "I watch lessons," Lily continued, her voice getting a tiny bit stronger, "at the community center. I hide behind the curtain and watch Mrs. Chen teach. I've been doing it for 3 years. And at night I practice on a cardboard piano I made. I drew all the keys and I practice for hours. I know it sounds crazy, but I've learned. I really have." The silence that followed was heavy. Lily could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could hear the soft music still playing through the speakers somewhere. She could hear someone's heel tap nervously on the floor. Then she said the words that took every ounce of courage she had. Please, just one song. If I can't play it, if I mess it up, I'll leave right now and I'll never bother anyone again. I promise. Just give me one chance. Just one. The crowd exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical. Some looked uncomfortable, like they'd suddenly realized they were part of something that might be cruel. The woman in pearls looked away, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The man with the shiny shoes studied his champagne glass like it was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. Mrs. Ashworth stood perfectly still, studying Lily's face. It felt like she was looking right into Lily's soul, seeing everything she'd been through, every hungry night, every cold morning, every silent practice session on cardboard keys. The moment stretched out so long that Lily thought she might faint from holding her breath. Then Mrs. Ashworth did something unexpected. A small smile touched the corners of her lips. Not a mocking smile, not a pitying smile, something else entirely. Very well, she said. One song. Then we'll see. The crowd erupted in whispers. Some people looked shocked. Others looked curious. The hotel manager opened his mouth like he wanted to protest, but one look from Mrs. Ashworth silenced him. He stepped back, shaking his head slightly, probably already imagining the disaster this was going to be. Lily's heart leaped. She'd done it. She'd actually convinced them to let her try. But now came the scary part. The part where she actually had to play, in front of all these people, on a real piano. After years of only practicing on cardboard, she walked toward the piano on shaking legs. Each step felt like it took forever. The platform it sat on was only a few inches high, but it felt like climbing a mountain. When she finally reached the bench, she had to climb up onto it. Her feet dangled above the pedals, barely able to reach them. The piano was even more beautiful up close. The keys gleamed under the chandelier light. They were smooth and perfect, not a single scratch or mark on them. Lily reached out and touched one key gently. It was cool under her finger, solid, real. Her hands were shaking badly now. She placed them on the keys, trying to remember everything Mrs. Chen had taught her students. Curved fingers like holding a small ball, wrists relaxed, back straight. But it was hard to remember any of that when her whole body was trembling. Behind her, she could feel the weight of all those eyes, hundreds of them, all watching, all waiting, some probably hoping she'd succeed, others probably waiting for her to fail so they could feel justified in their initial reactions. The boy who'd laughed was silent now, but she could feel him staring at her back. Lily closed her eyes. She tried to block out the crowd, tried to block out the fear. She thought about her mother, who would be coming home from her first shift soon, exhausted and worried because Lily wasn't home. She thought about all those nights practicing on cardboard, her fingers pressing silently while music played in her head. She thought about Mrs. Chen's patient voice explaining how music wasn't just about hitting the right notes. It was about feeling, about putting your heart into every key press, about telling a story without words. Lily had a story to tell, story about being invisible, about being hungry and cold and scared, but also about having hope, about having a dream so big it hurt, about refusing to give up even when everything seemed impossible. Someone in the crowd coughed. Someone else shifted their weight. Lily heard a woman whisper, "This is absurd." Another voice said, "She probably doesn't even know where middle C is." The doubt in their voices made something inside Lily shift. The fear didn't disappear, but something else rose up alongside it, something fierce and determined. She'd come this far. She'd made it through 3 years of secret lessons and cardboard practice. She'd snuck into this fancy hotel. She'd stood in front of all these rich people in her taped shoes and messy hair and asked for a chance. She wasn't going to waste it. Lily opened her eyes. She looked down at the keys, real keys, and for just a moment she imagined she was back home. Just her and her cardboard piano. Just her and the music in her head. No crowd, no pressure. Just the pure joy of playing. She took one deep breath. Then another. Her fingers found their positions. She could do this. She knew she could. She'd played this piece 1,000 times in her mind. 1,000 times on silent cardboard. Now it was time to play it for real. The lobby was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Every conversation had stopped. Every person was focused on this small girl at this grand piano, waiting, judging, doubting. Lily's fingers trembled over the keys one last time. Then, with all the courage she had left in her 8-year-old body, she pressed down. The first note rang out pure and clear. It filled the entire lobby, bouncing off the marble floors and the high ceiling. It was the most beautiful sound Lily had ever heard in her life. Her own hands had made that sound. Not cardboard, not imagination, real music. And then she began to play. Her fingers moved to the next note, then the next. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the pieces she'd watched Mrs. Chen teach over and over again, one of the pieces she'd practiced until she could play it in her sleep. But this was different. This was real. The melody started soft and gentle like a lullaby. Lily's fingers found their rhythm, moving across the keys with growing confidence. The fear started to fade away, replaced by something else. Something magical. It was like the piano was singing, and she was helping it find its voice. Her right hand carried the melody while her left hand provided the harmony underneath. The notes wove together like threads in a tapestry. Each one led naturally to the next. And slowly, without even realizing it, Lily stopped thinking about the crowd behind her. She stopped thinking about her taped shoes and messy hair. She stopped thinking about anything except the music. The piece began to build. The notes came faster, more complex. Lily's fingers danced across the keys. Her whole body swayed slightly with the rhythm. And then something incredible happened. The music took over completely. It wasn't Lily playing anymore. It was like the music was playing through her. Every lonely night she'd ever experienced flowed through her fingers. Every time she'd gone to bed hungry. Every time she'd hidden behind that curtain, dreaming of this exact moment. All of it poured out through the piano. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. Her fingers kept moving, kept finding the right keys. The melody swelled and grew, filling every corner of that massive lobby. And behind her, though she couldn't see it, something remarkable was happening. The whispers had stopped completely. Every single person in that lobby stood frozen, listening. The music filled every corner of the grand lobby. It wrapped around the crystal chandeliers and bounced off the marble floors. It touched every person standing there, whether they wanted it to or not. And one by one, their faces began to change. The woman in pearls who'd whispered about getting Lily out before she damaged the piano stood with her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide and glistening. The man who'd been studying his champagne glass had forgotten all about it. His arm hung loose at his side, the glass tilting dangerously but not quite spilling. Even the waiters had stopped moving. They stood frozen with their trays, completely mesmerized. One of them had tears running down his face. He'd grown up poor too, in a village across the ocean, and something about this music reminded him of home. Of dreams he'd had before life got complicated. Lily's fingers moved faster now, reaching the heart of the piece. This was the part that always made her chest feel tight when she practiced it on cardboard. The part where the melody climbed higher and higher, like it was reaching for something just out of grasp. Her fingers stretched across the keys, hitting notes that were far apart, but she didn't miss a single one. The boy who'd laughed at her stood completely still. His face had gone red, and not from laughter this time. He felt something heavy sitting in his chest. Shame, though he was too young to really understand what that meant. He just knew he'd been wrong. Very, very wrong. His mother's hand tightened on his shoulder, and when he glanced up at her, he saw she was crying quietly. Mrs. Ashworth remained perfectly composed, but her eyes never left Lily. She watched this small girl in tattered clothes pour her entire soul into the piano, and she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Raw talent, pure passion, the kind of gift that couldn't be taught or bought. You were either born with it or you weren't. And this child, who had nothing in the world except cardboard and dreams, had it burning inside her like a flame. The music reached its emotional peak. This was the part Lily loved most, the part where the melody became almost too beautiful to bear. Her fingers pressed the keys with such feeling that the piano seemed to cry out. Every note carried weight. Every chord told a story. It spoke of loneliness and hunger, of cold nights and uncertain mornings. But it also spoke of hope, of refusing to give up, of beauty existing even in the darkest places. People in the crowd weren't even trying to hide their tears anymore. They let them fall freely. It didn't matter that they were at a fancy gala in expensive clothes. It didn't matter that crying might smudge makeup or make them look vulnerable. The music had broken through all of that. It had found the place in each of them that was still human, still capable of being moved by something real. A woman in a glittering gold dress remembered being a little girl herself, before the money and the status. She remembered playing in her grandmother's garden, dreaming of doing something special with her life. When had she stopped dreaming? When had everything become about appearances and social standing? A man in a perfectly tailored suit thought about his own son, who took piano lessons in their mansion but hated every minute of it. He paid a teacher $200 an hour to teach a boy who would rather be playing video games. And here was this street child who'd taught herself on cardboard, playing with more skill and passion than he'd ever heard from his own son. The hotel manager, who'd been so ready to escort Lily out, felt his throat tighten. In all his years working at the Riverside, hosting countless events with professional musicians and entertainers, he'd never heard anything like this. This wasn't just music. This was a miracle happening right in front of him. Lily's fingers began to slow as the piece entered its final section. The melody became softer, gentler. It was like the music was settling down after pouring out all its emotion. Her hands moved with such grace and control that it was hard to believe she'd never touched a real piano before today. The years of cardboard practice, the countless hours of silent repetition, they'd all prepared her for this moment. The tears on her face kept falling, but she didn't wipe them away. She couldn't. Her hands were busy coaxing the last beautiful notes from the piano. This moment was everything she'd dreamed of and more. The feel of real keys under her fingers. The sound of actual music filling the air instead of just playing in her imagination. It was overwhelming and perfect and heartbreaking all at once. As the piece moved toward its conclusion, Lily poured everything she had left into those final measures. Every ounce of determination that had kept her going through hard times. Every moment of joy she'd found in the music even when life was difficult. Every hope she'd had for a better future. It all flowed through her fingers and into the piano. The melody climbed one last time, reaching a point of quiet beauty, and then began its gentle descent. The notes came slower now, like a bird settling down to rest. Lily's fingers touched the keys with such tenderness that the music seemed to whisper rather than sing. And then, with one final soft chord, it was over. Her hands lifted from the keys and settled in her lap. The last note hung in the air for a moment, echoing through the silent lobby. Then it faded away, leaving nothing but absolute quiet. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds. Lily sat perfectly still on the bench, her heart pounding, her face wet with tears, afraid to turn around and see their faces. Had it been good enough? Had she made too many mistakes? She couldn't remember making any. But she'd been so lost in the music that she honestly didn't know. Maybe they were all standing there in shock because it had been terrible. Maybe they were trying to figure out how to politely tell her to leave now. The silence went on and on. Lily's hands started to shake again. She gripped her knees to make them stop. She could feel the weight of all those eyes on her back. What were they thinking? Why wasn't anyone saying anything? And then, cutting through the silence like a bell, came the sound of clapping. Lily's head jerked up. The sound was coming from behind her. She turned slightly on the bench and saw Mrs. Ashworth. The elderly woman was applauding, her hands coming together with steady, deliberate force. Her face was composed, but there was something bright shining in her eyes. For a moment, Mrs. Ashworth clapped alone. Then a man near her started clapping too. Then another person. Then another. It spread through the crowd like a wave, growing louder and stronger with each passing second. Soon everyone was clapping. The woman in pearls. The man with the champagne. The waiters and hotel staff. The boy who'd mocked her and his mother. Every single person in that lobby was applauding. But it wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping you do just to be nice. This was real. This was people genuinely moved by what they'd witnessed. The applause grew louder. Some people weren't just clapping anymore. They were cheering. A few were still crying while they clapped, tears streaming down their faces as they brought their hands together again and again. The sound thundered through the lobby, so loud it seemed to shake the chandeliers. Lily climbed down from the piano bench, her legs wobbling beneath her. She didn't know what to do. She'd never had people clap for her before. She'd never had anyone pay attention to her at all, really. And now all these important, wealthy people were applauding like she'd done something incredible. Mrs. Ashworth stepped forward through the crowd. She moved with purpose and people parted to let her through. When she reached Lily, she didn't stand at a distance like most adults did with dirty street children. She knelt down, right there on the expensive marble floor in her beautiful purple dress. She knelt down until she was eye level with Lily. "Child," she said, and her voice was gentle but also strong. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lily's voice came out as barely a whisper. But in the moment of quiet that had fallen after the applause, everyone could hear her. She told her story, about watching Mrs. Chen's lessons from behind the curtain, about the cardboard piano she'd made from a box, about practicing every single night until her fingers hurt, about never giving up even though she had no real piano, no lessons, no teacher who even knew she existed. The crowd listened in complete silence. As Lily spoke, more people started crying. They weren't tears of pity exactly. They were tears of recognition. Recognition of how hard this child had worked. How much she'd wanted this. How she'd taken nothing and turned it into something beautiful. When Lily finished her story, Mrs. Ashworth didn't speak right away. She just looked at Lily with those sharp, clear eyes. Then she reached out and took both of Lily's small, rough hands in her own soft, wrinkled ones. 40 years ago, Mrs. Ashworth said, "I was a girl like you." The crowd seemed to lean in, straining to hear. This was a story Mrs. Ashworth rarely told. "I had nothing," she continued. "My family was poor. We lived in a tiny apartment with no heat in the winter. But I had a dream. I wanted to be a dancer, and one person gave me a chance when everyone else said I'd never make it." She squeezed Lily's hands gently. "I've spent my whole life looking for children who have that same fire, that same refusal to give up, that same ability to create beauty out of nothing. And you, my dear child, have it burning brighter than anyone I've ever met." Lily didn't understand what was happening. Was this real? Was Mrs. That night changed everything. Not just for Lily, but for everyone who'd been in that lobby. The story spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Someone had recorded Lily's performance on their phone, and by the next morning, the video was everywhere. People across the city watched this small girl in taped shoes sit down at a grand piano and play like an angel. They watched the tears stream down her face as the music poured out of her. They heard her story about the cardboard piano and the secret lessons. And their hearts broke and healed at the same time. The video didn't stay in just one city. It spread across the country, then across the world. Within a week, millions of people had watched it. The comments section filled with messages from people sharing their own stories. People who'd grown up poor but never gave up on their dreams. People who'd been told they weren't good enough. People who'd practiced in secret hoping for a chance. But while the world was watching a video, real life was changing for Lily in ways she never could have imagined. Mrs. Ashworth kept her promise. She didn't just keep it. She went far beyond it. Within 3 days, she'd arranged a full scholarship to the city's most prestigious music academy. The kind of place where famous pianists had trained, the kind of place Lily had only seen in pictures. The academy's director came to meet Lily personally. He was a stern-looking man with gray hair and glasses, the kind of person who seemed like he never smiled. But when he heard Lily play, when he learned her story, his eyes got misty. He shook her hand like she was already a professional musician and told her she had a gift that comes along once in a generation. A piano showed up at Lily's apartment 2 days later. Not just any piano. A beautiful upright piano that had been lovingly restored. The delivery men had to take the door off its hinges to get it inside. It barely fit in their small living room, taking up almost half the space, but neither Lily nor her mother cared. When Lily's mother came home from work that evening and saw the piano sitting there, she stood in the doorway and cried. She cried for all the years of struggle. For all the times she'd felt like she was failing her daughter. For all the guilt she'd carried about not being able to give Lily the things other children had. And now this. This impossible, beautiful gift. Lily played for her mother that night. Really played, not on cardboard but on real keys that sang under her fingers. Her mother sat on their worn couch and listened to her daughter make music that seemed too beautiful to be coming from their tiny apartment. The neighbors knocked on the walls at first, annoyed by the noise. But then they stopped knocking and started listening. Soon people were sitting in the hallway outside the apartment, just to hear the music floating through the door. The boy who'd laughed at Lily in the hotel lobby came to find her a week later. He showed up at her apartment with his mother, His face was red with embarrassment, and he could barely look at Lily when he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I was mean to you. I judged you before I even knew you. And you're amazing. What you did. Teaching yourself like that, it's the coolest thing I've ever heard of." His mother added her own apology. She'd been thinking about that night constantly, about how quickly she'd judged a child based on her appearance, about how close they'd all come to missing something truly special because of their prejudices. She'd talked to her son about it every day since then, trying to teach him the lesson she should have taught him years ago. Lily forgave them both, not because she had to, but because she understood. She'd been invisible for so long that she couldn't really be angry at people for not seeing her. What mattered was that they saw her now, that they'd learned something. The boy became one of her closest friends after that. He was one of the few people who'd known her before and after, who understood how much her life had changed. The academy was harder than Lily had imagined. She was behind in many ways. She couldn't read music as fast as the other students. She didn't know all the technical terms. She'd never learned proper music theory. But she worked harder than anyone else. She stayed late every single day, practicing until the janitor had to politely ask her to leave so he could lock up. Her teacher at the academy, a woman named Professor Williams, saw something special in Lily from day one. It wasn't just her talent. Plenty of students had talent. It was her hunger to learn, her appreciation for every single lesson. While other students complained about practicing scales, Lily did them with joy. While others groaned about theory homework, Lily absorbed every bit of knowledge like she was afraid it might disappear. Professor Williams had been teaching for 30 years, and she'd never had a student quite like Lily. She started staying late too, giving Lily extra lessons for free. Not because she had to, but because teaching someone who wanted to learn that badly was a gift in itself. Years passed. Lily grew from a small 8-year-old into a young woman, but she never forgot where she came from. She kept her cardboard piano even though it was worn and faded now. It sat in the corner of her room as a reminder. On days when practice got frustrating, when pieces seemed too difficult or competition felt overwhelming, she'd look at that cardboard and remember the girl who'd practiced on it for years with nothing but hope and determination. She started teaching free lessons at the community center where she'd once hidden behind the curtain. Kids from poor families, kids who couldn't afford fancy academies, they came to learn from her. Some of them reminded her so much of herself that it hurt. She saw that same hunger in their eyes, that same desperate wish to be good at something, to have something that was theirs. Mrs. Chen, the teacher Lily had watched all those years ago, came to one of those free lessons. She was older now, moving slower, but her eyes were still sharp. When she realized that Lily had been her secret student all along, she laughed and cried at the same time. "I knew someone was sneaking in," she said. "I could feel it. But I never imagined it was a child teaching herself by watching." Mrs. Ashworth stayed involved in Lily's life too. She came to every recital, every performance. She sat in the front row with the same purple dress she'd worn that first night, or at least one very similar. After each performance, she'd come backstage and give Lily a hug. She never said much. Just "well done, child," or "your mother would be so proud." But Lily could feel the warmth in those hugs, the genuine care. 10 years after that night at the Riverside Hotel, Lily stood backstage at one of the most famous concert halls in the world. She was 18 now, no longer the small girl in taped shoes. She wore a beautiful blue gown that Mrs. Ashworth had insisted on buying for her. Her hair was styled perfectly. She looked like she belonged on that stage. But inside, she was still that scared 8-year-old. Her hands were shaking. This was Carnegie Hall. Legendary musicians had played here. Famous composers had premiered their work here. And now she was about to walk out onto that stage and perform for thousands of people. She peeked through the curtain at the audience. The seats went up and up, row after row of people, all there to hear her play. In the front row, she saw familiar faces. Her mother, who'd taken the night off from both jobs for the first time in years. Mrs. Ashworth sitting straight and proud. Professor Williams with her husband. And there, just a few seats away, was the boy who'd once laughed at her. Now a young man who'd become one of her biggest supporters. An usher gave her the signal. It was time. Lily took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause was immediate and thunderous. Thousands of hands clapping for her before she'd even played a note. She walked to the grand piano in the center of the stage, the spotlight following her movement. She sat down at the bench, arranged her dress, and placed her hands on the keys. The audience fell silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Someone coughed quietly in the back row. And then nothing but expectant silence. Lily looked out at all those faces. And for just a moment, she wasn't at Carnegie Hall. She was back in her tiny apartment, sitting on the floor with her cardboard piano spread out in front of her. She was that little girl with big dreams and nothing but determination. That girl who'd refused to give up even when she had every reason to. She thought about how one moment of courage had changed everything. How walking into that hotel, scared and desperate, had led to this. How playing one song in front of people who doubted her had opened doors she never knew existed. Before she began playing, she did something unexpected. She spoke into the microphone that had been set up near the piano. "I want to tell you a story," she said, her voice clear and strong. 10 years ago, I was a street kid who taught herself piano on a keyboard I made from cardboard. People laughed at me. They didn't think someone like me could play. But someone gave me a chance, just one chance, and it changed my life. She paused, looking out at the audience. "So I want you to remember something. Talent exists everywhere, in places you'd never think to look, in people you might walk past without seeing, behind taped shoes and messy hair. The only difference between someone who makes it and someone who doesn't is often just one person who believes in them. One person who says yes when everyone else says no." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. This performance tonight is for everyone who's ever dreamed of something that seemed impossible. For everyone who's